You may remember 8BitDo, they brought you the Ultimate controller. I loved this thing, but guess what? It's time for a new one. It's the Ultimate 2C. Actually, it's not the successor to the Ultimate, it's the successor to the 8BitDo Ultimate C, which is the cheaper version of this controller, and now they've got a new version of that. It's the Ultimate C2, but it's actually called this 2C. This is the special edition, so for $5 extra, you also get the artwork from Black Myth Wukong plastered all over it. So personally, I think there should be a rule against calling a controller the Infinity or the Ultimate or anything like that. What comes after Infinity? Infinity plus 1. In order to open this, I need to get a knife. Fortunately, I'm always prepared. I always have these things ready. Just want to point out that this controller was sent to me free of charge for the purposes of making this video. I don't have to say anything specific about it. I don't have to send it back at the end, and all opinions are my own. All right, Miku, what's the biggest knife you've got? It has artwork for Black Myth Wukong on the front of the box. Can't play the game for you because I don't actually own the game. Actually, they contacted me, but I just haven't had a chance to email them back. This is supposedly a very exciting release of this controller because people have been talking about this game a lot. We've got a USB-C cable. The moment you've been waiting for, Black Myth. Just take it out of the plastic. Oh, I've not seen this before. Got these little analog stick protectors. That's nice. Whew. I know you love the ASMR. Here we go. Got that classic 8BitDo wireless adapter. I'm a big fan of these USB dongles, easier than having to go to the Bluetooth pairing menu and trying to sync up controllers. We've got some instructions here, which I probably won't read. Apparently, you can remap the buttons without using software. So there's your shiny new controller. Cool red insignias on it. As you can see, it's not completely black. Looks like there's a translucent layer over the top of it. Fiery swirls. Red on the inside of these analog sticks, which by the way are Hall Effect joysticks, and on the back of the controller you can see that official branding for the brand new game that has just come out, Black Myth. But probably the most exciting thing about this controller is that instead of having back buttons like we had on this, the Ultimate controller, we actually now have 3 shoulder buttons per side. Shoulder button, the shoulder trigger, and we also have this mini little shoulder button, and this is being called R4 and L4. Strangely enough, they're still using that Nintendo Switch branding. We've got the plus and the minus buttons, which are going to be your start button and select button, or start and back, or options and share, whatever the heck these console makers want to rename the buttons. Let's just call them start and select. Apparently they have changed it, so let's test the D-pad now. Oh, hang on. Just get the original 8BitDo Ultimate. This is just a very standard membrane feeling D-pad. On the 8-bit Ultimate 2C, it definitely still has that membrane feel, but it's like membrane with clicks. Can you hear that? You get a lot of feedback before with the slightly mushier feel of the previous D-pad. When you would roll the D-pad around and do circular motion, you just lost all of that clickiness. It's only really on that first single tap. But on the Ultimate 2C, even rolling my hand around continuously, still get all of those clicky feels. It feels really nice, but the question is, how does it perform in gameplay? All right, as you can see, I've got Street Fighter set up, and I've got my Black Myth Wukong edition of the 8BitDo Ultimate 2C. Feels good to do technical motions because you actually feel the buttons click as you move around here. I'm a big fan of having a clicky D-pad. Don't really need clicky buttons over here, so actually I'm quite happy that they've just stuck with standard membrane buttons here. Other things you want to see is the extra buttons on here. So we've got L4 and R4. This is the mapping button. If I hold down R4 and the mapping button and I set it to X, then when I press R4, I've actually just got a second version of my punch. I can punch with this button, or I can punch with this button. But a more useful way of setting it would be to have R4, mapping button, and then R3. So now every time I press R4, I'm actually getting R3. You don't want to be trying to do Drive Rush by clicking in the analog stick like this. It's just very difficult to actually time it properly. So having R4 just double the R3 button is nice. I don't know if technically that's going to be tournament legal, but if you're just playing at home, obviously no one really cares. Now, if you want to use the L4 button as well, you can do the same thing. And let's set it to this. There's a bit of hand gymnastics to the L3 button. And so it says L4, but really what we're getting is just a double of the L3 button. And as you can see, now I can do Drive Impact using only my index fingers. Oh yeah, very happy with that. Gotta say, I've always been a fan of the shape of the controller since the 8BitDo Ultimate. I can say that it probably hasn't changed at all. It feels exactly the same, but of course the main difference is if you get the Ultimate controller, you get back buttons. If you want to have these extra shoulder buttons instead, then the 2C might be the one you want to go for. Main thing that you won't get if you go for this controller instead of the Ultimate Edition is that it won't be compatible with Nintendo Switch. This is a Windows and Android only controller, but you could get an adapter that turns an X input controller into something that will work on your Nintendo Switch. That's up to you. Literally, as I am making this video, I've decided to try out the 8BitDo Ultimate software. So here's the new firmware. I can click update. Okay, all that is a roundabout way of saying that this software doesn't actually let me reconfigure the controller. It just lets me update the firmware. That's a little bit curious, which means that you won't be able to probably use this legally in a tournament because you can't get really around the fact that you've got 2 buttons set to R3. One thing that is interesting though is that you can also press R for button remapping and press a combination of buttons. So if I press the 2 medium buttons like this, if I press it now, it actually does do the parry for me. I think with Street Fighter, you have to use the macros that are built into the game if you're going to be using a macro at all. But again, it's just quite a cool feature. Pressing multiple buttons at the same time for EX moves, no problem. Being able to do a standard combo, no problem. Doing my drive rush every time, no problem. And the other test, which is also super important, is can I get left and right without accidentally getting jump? And I have to say, this is actually better than the 8BitDo Ultimate controllers, which is a good thing because I also want to use this in some puzzle games. But before we do that, let's try out another fighting game. All right, here in Under Night in Birth, just want to test out the D-pad and make sure that it does everything I want. And I've got to say, so far, quite happy. I mean, this is only the first 60 seconds testing this controller, but you do feel when you do things like this fast fall, when I jump up in the air, if I press down, down twice, I do a fast fall. When I go from down forward to down back, most of the time I'm not missing any inputs. I guess if I really tried very hard to go super quickly and skip the input, I sometimes can make it happen. But generally speaking, if I go from a down forward C into a Tatsu motion, I'm able to actually get the move out without missing it. That's nice. I will say it's not perfect. I think sometimes if you do try really hard to skip it, it will skip. With any 8BitDo controller with the D-pad test, we need to play some puzzle games to see if we get some accidental up inputs. All right, it's been a little while since I played Tetris, but this is one of those games that I do play a lot, and I don't want to have to deal with accidental up movements when I'm just going left and right. All right, I'm not having any issues with the D-pad so far, but what I will say is that they're quite a little bit more sensitive than I was expecting, which is probably a good thing, but you have to be very careful with your button presses. You don't want to be too heavy-handed. I did find that sometimes I would press up and I'd end up pressing up twice. But overall, this is a very satisfactory performance for a controller that is so inexpensive. Though, of course, this being the 2C, it does not actually work with the Nintendo Switch. So if you are going to use this to replace your Nintendo Switch Pro controller, you will need an adapter. Oh, this is my favorite bit. Listen, that's pretty much it for this unboxing and testing of the Black Myth Wukong edition of the 8BitDo Ultimate 2C. In my opinion, this is kind of preferable to the actual 8BitDo Ultimate controller, and that goes for $69.99 retail. Now, the more expensive controller does work on Switch, but this one, the 2C, definitely has a superior D-pad. Having extra shoulder buttons instead of having back buttons might actually be more preferable if you don't like using back buttons. It is a weird kind of thing to get used to. The Black Myth Wukong edition with all these red swirly lines all over it is quite nice, and this sort of menacing looking red light. And being wired Bluetooth or wireless with the dongle, I think at this price it's going to be quite difficult to beat the Ultimate 2C in terms of value for money. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments section below. If you want to see further testing, I could do a more in-depth review if you're interested to see how it performs over time. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and check out this video next if you love pad controllers, fighting games, puzzle games, and all that great stuff. I've been NihongoGamer. I'll see you real soon.